Well, I haven't done a welding video for my welding playlist in quite some time. I've been going through a reanalysis, rethink, whatever about it. When I got started in it, again, after 50 years of not doing any welding, I was thinking about doing metal art stuff I could do from scrap metal. And that sort of evolved into more structural stuff because I needed a workbench and I needed this and I needed that. And then I got a few little fabrication projects that I did. And I started down that road pretty heavy without really thinking it through from the standpoint that I got very limited space. So dealing with 24-foot lengths of steel, while possible, was difficult. And pretty soon I just ran out of structural projects. I mean, for my own self, I've only got X amount of space. And so I've got my shelving, I've got my welder tables and plasma cutting tables, and everything's done. So there's no more structural or fabrication stuff to really do. Not to say I wouldn't come across a project now and then, but at any rate, to make a long story short, in doing all of this, I've accumulated quite a bit of equipment. Some of it is not being used anymore, such as the first welder I bought was a generator, gasoline generator type welder that would do over 200 amps, a stick welder, and I could almost build a battleship with it. But soon after getting it, I found out it was too noisy for my neighbors to tolerate. So that was $1,300. It's sitting in my shed now without being used. Then I went through several versions of MIG, really wire welding. I don't want to mess with the gas, so I'm using flux core wire. The first machine I bought had a defect in it that I didn't understand the source of the problem until it was too late to return it. So that was a write-off. I ended up buying a titanium flux wire welder from Harbor Freight. It's 110 only. And for the purpose, I bought it so I could tack stuff together easily, particularly smaller pieces where if I was using stick welding and the electrode stuck to the piece, I'd have to start over again in terms of setup. And for that purpose, it's been fine. I bought a plasma cutter from a Yes Weld brand, 110, 220. And it has developed a problem that I can't seem to get to the root of. If I start cutting and stop, then when I try to start cutting again, I get an alarm on the machine and I don't even know what that means, but it won't work anymore until I power it down, count to 10, power it back up, and then I can do another cut. I'm still experimenting with the expendables. The next time I use it, I'm going to replace all the expendables, including the little ceramic ring, everything, just so I have a baseline, and maybe that'll cure the project. Another big piece of equipment that I bought that I just don't use much anymore is I've got a 14-inch abrasive saw, which works fine enough, but God, that thing's noisy. But if I want to be sure to cut something at an absolute angle, I will drag it out occasionally, but I haven't used it now in months and months. I have found that the tool that's absolutely indispensable is the angle grinder. In fact, I got 3 of those now, so I keep them loaded up, one with a cutoff wheel, one with a wire brush, and the other with a flap disc. And I haven't found anything I couldn't cut with the cutoff wheel. It's really tedious to try to cut a long piece of sheet metal with it. That's when I'll definitely break out the plasma torch. But anyway, getting back to my current dilemma. Okay, so I don't have the space to do it, nor the projects to really get into the fabrication into things. As far as metal art goes, the sad thing is I've discovered I'm not an artist. Oh, so what is it I want to do with welding, given my space and budget and everything else? I guess basically I'm a tinker, and I'm happy doing that. But I need to scale down the size of my projects in terms of material. That will relieve a lot of my space problems, because right now I have an 8-foot long metal rack that I fabricated just to store the metal. I mean, it comes in 24-foot lengths generally, so I have to cut that into 8-foot sections thereabouts, or usually I cut them into 4-foot sections and put it on my metal rack. But now I got quite a bit of metal, not necessarily anything I need, but a lot of metal. So what has intrigued me mostly, and if I'm going to get into some small scale fabrication, you could call it art. I'm not going to call it art because it's really crafty kind of things. It's not really artistic. So I'm going to sort of do miniaturized stuff. When I say miniaturized stuff, a foot square or smaller. And to do that kind of intricate stuff, I need to get beyond just a drill press, cutter, and welder. So my next idea of a big purchase is a metal lathe, small one, miniature lathe. And I've got it in my head that a good cheap material and one that I can handle readily given the space I have is rebar. But I don't want the gnarly edges that's on rebar. So I saw a video here on YouTube where somebody was turning rebar with a lathe and coming up with a beautiful piece of stock. And rebar's still, as far as I know, the cheapest way to buy metal. So I'm thinking about doing that. My first step in doing any of that is I've got to clean up my scrap yard. That's what my neighbors object to the most, I'm sure. And that's going to take me 2 or 3 days. Some of it, I'm going to have to just put it out with the trash little by little. Once I cut it down to the point it'll fit in the trash. And I've got to decide to do what to do with my generator-based welder. I should sell it, but I'll be lucky to get 50 cents on the dollar. But 50 cents on the dollar is better than it's sitting in the shed wasting away. In fact, I need to get it out soon just to crank it, let it run a little while, and then put it back. But another side note, I know I'm rambling, but this is the way my mind works. Isn't that scary? And this really touches on the whole flux wire welding. While it's good for tacking, I'm not that enamored with wire welding. I'm sure if I were in an industrial setting where I'm doing this for hours and hours and hours, production kind of work, it might be ideal. But for what I'm doing, excuse me, I'm not enamored with it. Then the other thing too is I've done a lot of stick welding recently, and still experimenting with which electrode is best for what. And I came across something quite by accident. I had some 6011 electrodes, which is very aggressive, deep penetrating electrode. I don't know why I bought them, but it wasn't a whole lot, maybe a pound. But I discovered one interesting thing about it. It is super for tacking. I mean, you can plop that thing down, hold the arc just for a second, and you've got a really good tack. And of course, it's great for heavier stuff, for doing the root pass, obviously, because it'll penetrate all the way through before you do your overlay passes. But at any rate, I've gotten back where I really am a fan of stick welding. I've never done TIG. It looks awfully tedious, unless I can figure out what the heck it is I'm trying to do. The last thing I need is another welder. So, what is the conclusion to this? Well, my number one mistake was spending a lot of money before I had a clue as to what I was really going to do. Taking in consideration, I live in a 55+ community. The rules are very strict. Everything I do has to be hidden from view. And I'm working in a space of a 2-car carport attached to the house. So at any rate, and remember, I never intended this to be a business. I'm retired. Been retired since 2005. I don't want to get back into the rat race. I worked my entire career to have a comfortable retirement, and I've got that. So anyway, forgive the ramble. I'll follow up a little bit. I guess the biggest decision I got to make is whether I spend money for a mini lathe. I'll probably buy a cheap one, something from Harbor Freight. I've watched all the reviews on YouTube about mini lathes, and unfortunately, a lot of it is very technical. For somebody like myself who's never worked with a metal lathe. And but I'm getting a little bit leery of spending a lot of money and finding out I don't use it. So I'll probably buy a cheap Harbor Freight lathe, just to see if it's what I want to do with it. And unless I can come to a decision by February or March, and I'm doing something enjoyable with it, I'm probably going to just sell everything and look at it as not a bad dream, but because I've enjoyed what I've done. I've just run that clock out, if you understand what I'm getting at. So, by the way, my background picture, I try to include, let me see if I can turn around where you can see it. There we go. I always get backed up here. All right, that's the Rock of Gibraltar. I can't pronounce that right. In the Mediterranean, as you exit the Mediterranean and head toward Barcelona. No, heading away from Barcelona, heading toward the ocean. Anyway, the most interesting point of this is only like 16 miles wide through that channel. And it came through there at about sunset. And on my left side was Europe. I could see the lights from the cities there in Spain. And on the other side, I could see the lights from Morocco. So I was able to see two continents at one time. That was pretty neat. Then I proceeded to do a transatlantic crossing in a cruise ship that was never designed to be in open water in bad weather. But I did it, and I can certainly appreciate all the people in sailing ships that came to this country, and what a nightmare that must be. Okay, got to wrap this up. If you got any comments about suggesting the ways I should shape my hobby, put them in the comments, or if you have questions or whatever, I'll be happy to talk with you. All righty.